Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. We're beginning with our conversation with Doug Keck, who so generously joins us every week. This week, Doug and I want to talk about Donald Trump and recent statements that he has made. In August of this year, in light of his frankly gargantuan efforts in trying to bring to cessation the conflict in Ukraine, and then most recently with his peace plan that has allowed for a ceasefire in Gaza and between Hamas and Israel. Trump has made statements about how he doesn't believe he's going to make it to heaven and that nothing he can do will get him to heaven. And I want to be clear here. It's so easy. Gosh, it's so easy for people to sit on armchairs and to comment from a position of either entitlement or just continued passing of judgment. But there's some merit to his claims here. At least there's a low-level recognition that one cannot earn their way to heaven. And so Trump says, rather than shoot for heaven, he's shooting for Mount Rushmore. Now, clearly, this is a very pragmatic, very temporal way of viewing the meaning of human existence. Trump ought to be seeking heaven, and it's incumbent upon you and I to be the conduits through which he hears the gospel of Jesus Christ and receives the grace of prayers for the sake of his salvation. And so my challenge to everyone who sits and criticizes politicians for whatever reason, we're never going to have the ideal politician because Christendom is over. We are in a post-Christian era. What we are going to have are fallen human persons engaging in the work of politics. And we have an obligation to pray for those in public office and to evangelize them, rather than sit from a place of moral superiority and try to belittle or even condemn their statements. We're not at a point of departure, my friends. We are at a point of evangelization. This is an opportunity. We go on from there to speak with David Bonagura. In an address earlier this year, Pope Leo remarked any form of service that doesn't have the gospel at its core is lacking. And so Catholic material charity is not designed to be an end into itself. The gospel must be its driving force. And finally, we speak with Derek Rotty about Fulton Sheen and his responses to the modern world. All this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Monday, October 20th. It's the feast of St. Cornelius the Centurion. Today's news brought to you by Visiting Angels, providing loving care and assistance for seniors in need at visitingangels.com. Pope Leo canonized 7 new saints before an estimated 70,000 people in St. Peter's Square yesterday. The new saints include the first from Venezuela and Papua New Guinea, as well as a former Satanist who underwent a dramatic conversion to become an apostle of the Rosary. The canonization coincided with World Mission Sunday. Before praying the Angelus, Pope Leo XIV, who was once an Augustinian missionary himself in Peru, urged the faithful to pray for today's missionaries. The FBI is investigating a suspicious hunting stand near Palm Beach Airport, where Air Force One frequently lands with President Trump. The Secret Service making the discovery during a security sweep of the property late last week. The agency confirmed the hunting stand was in a tree with a direct line of sight to the landing area for Air Force One. President Trump can deploy National Guard troops in Portland, that according to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Under the ruling, the justices say the Court of Appeals lacks the power to issue injunctive relief. The city of Portland couldn't show an injury since the troops hadn't been deployed. The Supreme Court will weigh whether a federal law that bars drug users from having guns violates the Second Amendment. The Trump administration urged the justices to look into it. It's the second gun rights case that the High Court will hear this term. A decision is expected to come by next summer. Former President Biden's son Hunter was convicted under the same law in June of 2024 before being pardoned. And gas prices are below $3 for the first time in years. That according to Gas Buddy. The average price nationwide is now just $2.98 a gallon. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
afternoon and welcome back. I'm Arthur Speeter. Joining me as he does every week is our friend Doug Keck of EWTN. This week, we want to talk about how the President of the United States says he doesn't think anything can get him into heaven, but he's aiming for Mount Rushmore instead. Doug, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I'm always glad to be able to connect with you because one of the main reasons that I enjoy our conversations too is you think rightly about how we ought to view even our political life and applying biblical principles, and Trump is no different. It's easy. I've heard so many Christians just disavow and say, oh, he's pretending to be the face of Christianity and what an embarrassment. I don't think that's what's going on, so maybe that's a good position to start with.
Well, let me ask those people who have now decided that they have the ability to judge other people. I thought who many times on every other situation will tell you that you're not in a position to judge, but somehow they understand his spiritual life. We all have to say, listen, I can watch a person's actions on the outside and judge their actions, and out of those I can extrapolate, make a guess at what's driving them. But I don't know for sure. Only God knows, which is why ultimately we're not the ones who decide what people's fate is. Right. God does, because we don't know all of the factors that go into that person's lives. How many gifts were they given versus the number of gifts they worked with? What were the impediments to their ability to live out a faithful life? Some of which maybe you have more of, some of which you may have less. So you really can't get into this kind of, deciding, well, they're just saying that. I think most people who do that are people, my guess, who don't agree with his political positions or don't like his style. Both of them are understandable, but neither one of them gives anybody an insight into his spiritual life.
I couldn't agree more, and unfortunately, I believe it also comes from a place of a tremendous superiority complex that we all need to check ourselves with, because here's the reality: we're living in a post-Christian era, and we've not had a faithfully Christian president in generations.
Right, and again, it's Christendom doesn't exist anymore, as we know. The idea that the ruler is this good Christian person, as we know, historical dramas will show us that they weren't always so wonderful people.
Right.
So, at the end of the day, it still relied on the faithful. It relied on the locale, the people in the local parish, or what was going on in the monasteries. Some bad and some good there too. I mean, because we're populated by people with original sin. And they're going to be, especially those people we count on the most to take the lead on teaching the gospel, are the ones who are going to be the most under attack by the enemy, as we know, because that's how it works. But I think what we have to look for is at least the idea of, from a positive cultural perspective, are these generally in line with what we'd like to see happen? So many things in the last few years. I mean, we've seen the whole kind of woke thing falling apart, and the trans thing is dropping dramatically because it was a social contagion,
right.
And somebody has found the vaccine. It's called the Emperor's New Clothes. They said, this is ridiculous,
Yep.
And we all agree, and people say, oh, now I can speak the truth without being canceled. So I'm going to say, yeah, I think this is ludicrous. And I think with people with Trump, I think like with everything, I mean, these are the same people who tell you, well, we can't be sure that Judas is in hell. And I'm not saying whether he is or he isn't, but, they seem to have an incredible amount of mercy for people that kind of doing the oddball things in life, serial killers or people who are doing horrible things, because we need to understand their background. But if they don't like somebody on the other side or politically, that person is obviously Satan's number one disciple.
Right. And so we're always going to see a kind of dichotomy in moral standards. And that brings us back to some of Trump's statements. One good thing that I can commend him for is that he does not have a kind of Pelagian view of heaven, that if he's even said this, I don't think there's anything I can do that's going to get me into heaven. So there is some sense here that he can't get to heaven of his own merit.
Right. Well, I think my guess is most of his faith came from his mother. His mother, I believe, was Scottish. I don't know if she was Presbyterian, if that's their background, or Methodists or Presbyterians, one of those two. I meant to look into it, and certainly from a Presbyterian perspective, that would be certainly the case that one is not going to be able to work themselves into heaven. I think what we should be happy about, and this is what everybody always says, is the prodigal son. Look, he's at least made the right steps to start to turn back toward God. If now Trump talks about God in such a way, certainly I think clearly, since he believes he was almost killed, and in many ways believes that maybe he was protected. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm just saying that's his perspective, that he believes that God, when somebody almost dies, it does make you think about your life. Right. You know what I mean? When somebody close dies, especially suddenly, it makes you stop and think about, well, what's important in life? I thought these things were also important, but in light of death, they really are meaningless. So I think for him, without a doubt, you have to think that he's had some spiritual awakening of some sort that at least makes him understand about his mortality. And that there is something beyond here, and that he'd like to believe that some of the things he's doing, are positive in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what he's talking about.
And Doug, we also have to very honestly admit that what he has achieved with the ceasefire, in some ways is unprecedented. The 20-point plan for lasting peace has never been achieved before. So by the grace of God, something lasting can be done. But also the strides he's making with the Ukrainian conflict. So in a lot of ways, for all the indictments that are being passed on him by those who are passing moral judgment, he's doing a tremendous amount of moral good as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's like the world we live in today. The fact is, as I think Trump said one time, he said, I could cure cancer, and there are people still be complaining that I should have done it 10 years ago. It's one of those kind of things, and we do live in a world like that is so bifurcated and so adversarial that even when the person does a right thing, we're quick to want to, oh yeah, that's true, but what about all these other things they should be doing? And that's why, for all the positive things that are going on, obviously from even a Christian perspective in the efforts to take care of people and do different things, the immigration thing of course comes up, and there's a lot of perspectives on that, but certainly one of them is, just remember, he's not the Archbishop of the United States, he's the president, and the job of the president is to protect the United States, and in certain cases, from a perspective of borders, etc., it's a totally different perspective than certainly what the bishop of El Paso's position should even be, because they're different perspectives. One's worrying about my flock, and the other one's worrying about a country, and those are not necessarily always the same things.
Right. And thereby, the moral onus then falls upon us. Rather than sit in our armchairs and do this kind of entitlement commentating, there are certain Christian obligations here. Number one, to realize that some good is being done. Number two, we're not going to get any perfect candidate by any stretch of the imagination politically. Number three, we ought to be praying for his soul.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point. We want him to be enlightened, and we do. Should be doing that, and we've always said, the church will tell you, if you have somebody you have something against, you should go to them and express that, but you'd also be praying for them, and it's a lot harder to be mad at somebody that you're praying for. And I think one of the things that people have to step back and look at as well is sometimes we get into some of these social gospel issues and end up with things that are kind of utopian. This idea, well, this would be good, and this would, and meanwhile, if you look at South America, where you've kind of caught this, view of, in some ways, of that somehow poor people are holier than other people. Well, they may in effect be, because they're forced to rely more on God, and the less you have, the more you rely on God. That may be true, but it intrinsically is not true. And the reality is, in many cases in South America, as the church got into a heavy social gospel, a lot of the Catholics left, as we've seen, for Pentecostalism, because they hear Jesus being preached. Because as much as they want this world to be better. Mm-hmm. They want to believe that there's really something in the next, and we better make sure our priorities are correct.
Amen. Doug, that was a beautiful exhortation to end with. My guest has been Doug Keck of EWTN, and he has set for us the right paradigm here. Pray for Trump's eternal salvation and our own. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
You like pizza? Me too. And for that, we can thank our friend, Tom Monahan. First, he starts with $900 and opens one pizza shop. Then it's worldwide, thousands of shops. But all this was just a warm-up for his greatest achievement yet. He built a university.
God inspired Tom to build up generations of men and women who have a hunger to reach the world for Christ. This place is Ave Maria University.
Visit avemaria.edu to see what's next.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
And we need to pray for all our world leaders and all those who are in such danger. See, in a day and age where people are getting further away from God, you get further away from goodness. Only God is good. You remember what our Lord said one day? Why do you call me good? He said. Only God is good. Only God.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
In her diary, St. Faustina wrote, "If only I had a spiritual director from the beginning, I would not have wasted so many of God's graces. If even the saints needed spiritual guidance, how much more do we?" The nonprofit Revive app lets you meet virtually with certified spiritual companions, scheduling sessions at your convenience, helping you grow closer to Christ. Your first 2 sessions are free. Download the Revive app today. That's REVIV, and then the number 3.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Christianity is a religion of paradoxes. One is the strange relationship between the natural world that we see and the supernatural world that we do not. Joining me to talk about 2 forms of Christian service is David Bonagura. He's a prolific author, no stranger to this program. He's also an adjunct professor at the Catholic International University. David, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hello, Marcus. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to reconnect with you. I'm always intrigued by the wisdom you share with the world, and this is no different. The 2 forms of Christian service.
Well, thank you. Yes, 2 forms of Christian service. The one we think of most often is the one that involves material things, whether it be food and clothing and shelter on the one hand, or dollars on the other hand, whether you give money in coins or bills or as a check. But there's another form of Christian service. St. Augustine tells us that the greatest act of love that we could show someone is to give the other person God. So we could, as a second form of charity, because the first form of charity, the material act of charity, is essential to being a Christian, but we could also bring someone to God by bringing that person to Mass, by getting a Mass said for the dead, by bringing someone to confession, by inviting someone to pray with us. All those would be ways, a second form of Christian service, whereby we bring someone close to the purpose of our existence. Really, the purpose of our charity, too, is to bring someone to God.
Right. And okay, so in order for us to reground ourselves, you said that so matter-of-factly, you would think that that's obvious, but to reground ourselves in the work of especially welfare and therefore Christian charity, we've been besieged with a materialist Gnosticism, so to speak, where we believe that the work of welfare and charitable works are the end in themselves.
Right, exactly. We think of do the right thing. It's the right thing to do, and of course there's some truth to that. But when you say you pass a homeless man on the street or something to that effect, or the basket is passed at church and you put some money into it, the right thing to do is to put money in the basket. But why is it the right thing to do? It is the right thing to do because God puts in context all things. God is the author of all that's good, and he invites us to give, and not just invites, he commands us to give to others as his way of showing, as our way of showing our love for him. So to give to others is not just, we don't just do it because, the secular world tells us to do. And the way of thinking of, we're talking about giving charity, giving someone God, we live in such a materialist world where we only think about things.
Right.
So it's not, even the most pious Christian is not wrong in the sense that, oh yeah, but I just, I write a check or I do this for charity, I give clothes to the homeless and so on. And to not think, oh yeah, maybe I could give charity by giving a person. It's just, we're not conditioned to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important as Catholics that we remember that we ought to think that way, that we should always give to God. And I think of the Franciscans in the Bronx, not too far from me, when they have soup kitchens, they have all these outreaches in the poorer parts of New York City, and they never just give food or give clothes and say, yeah, hey, beat it, see you later. They never do that. They always do so in the context of trying to form a relationship.
Yeah.
And they don't form a relationship with the person just because that's a good thing, even though it is. They do it because they want to bring that person into an encounter with God. So the Franciscans in the Bronx and elsewhere are giving charity, but they're saying, hey, why don't you, they befriend the person, say, hey, why don't you come to our Vesper service tonight, or they actually have midnight mass. Why don't you come to our midnight mass and participate with us, pray with us. So that's a way that physical charity is the means to the greater gift. It's like another form of saying the old line of, if you give a man a fish, you give him food for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you give him food forever. Mm-hmm. Likewise, you give a man a fish, you give him food for the day. But if you give a man God, you give him the eternal food, the bread of life, on which he forever lives.
And so there's a kind of distinction here, but the two ought to go hand in hand, that our material giving must have as its final end the divine giving, that we really want to give them God. And I don't know if you remember this, David, but when Mother Teresa passed, there was an entire slew of secularist criticisms against her, because for a long time she was hailed as a hero by the typical progressivist narrative for the work she did with the poor, until they realized that no, she really was evangelizing them, and all of a sudden it was skewed in a bad light. But that's a misunderstanding of Christian charity.
Exactly, right? Christian charity is exactly what it is. Mother Teresa didn't do that work in the slums just because it was the right thing to do, or because she was just founding a new NGO or something like that. She did it because God commanded her to bring these people to her, and it was to give them a noble death so that they could encounter God in their final minutes, days, hours, however long it was. And then where did Mother Teresa and her nuns get their strength to do such difficult work? They spent hours a day in prayer, hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Mm-hmm. That was the source of their strength. So, as you said, rightly, the material and the spiritual are not bifurcated. They go together. They mutually support each other. But it's essential that the spiritual one always has to come first. It directs and orders the material. It tells us what to do with it, how to do with it. Everything comes from God and goes back to God. The material things are there to serve Him.
Can we take a step back from the deep dive to talk about why is it that the modern secularist culture doesn't want to see that? Why is this false dichotomy? And by the way, this false dichotomy, you and I can acknowledge, is also sometimes in church organizations, in Catholic organizations.
Yes. And again, I think part of it on the Catholic side of things, the material is just easier. We see it. It's easy to sit down and write a check. It's so easy. It's easy to just reach into the hip and then throw money in the basket of church. Right. It's easy to bring old clothes to the collection or things like that. It's so much harder, and it takes courage to say, my brother or my neighbor or my friend hasn't been going to church, maybe I can invite him. Or it takes courage and time and a great deal of patience to say, I'm going to take my elderly mother, my elderly father, my elderly grandparents to church, my elderly neighbor, because he or she can't get there anymore. And even though it's a big sacrifice on I'm going to do that. Those are things that, things that we can do. But the secular world just hates God. When people die, that's as deep as you could go. It's real simple. It just hates God, and it doesn't want any of that spiritual things in there. So, but it's funny how it loves the fruits of God. And what are the fruits of God? Material charity. There's no reason to give, the Romans didn't give material charity to orphans and beggars. They kicked them to the side of the road and let them die.
That's right.
Because they didn't believe in God, right? It's funny because these secularists, they don't want God, but they want all the things that come from God.
And
they're
so,
very inconsistent.
Exactly. And so what you're highlighting here is even the modern secularist notion of, do this because it's good. Well, you're getting that standard of goodness from the sacramental incarnational doctrine of the Catholic Church.
Right, exactly. Right, the sacramentum caritatis, the sacrament of charity, the sacrament of love, is the Eucharist. The great, the bread of life. Better than giving bread for a day is to give the bread of life that gives us to live in heaven. That's really what the Christian call is all about, to give the Eucharist. And of course, we need to give the regular bread so that we can make it to receive the bread of life. But it's the bread of life, the Eucharist, that's the one that really matters the most.
And because it matters the most, all of our giving should flow from our Eucharistic encounter with the Lord, but ultimately lead back to that. So talk about what you talk about in your article, which is that charity has a final causality.
Right, because the final cause, meaning the ultimate thing for which we do things, it's all over the Gospels. Jesus tells us to do unto others as do unto you, and in Matthew 25, probably perhaps most famously, even ominously, when he says, as often as you do this to the least of my brethren, you do it to me, and likewise, if you didn't do it to my brethren, you didn't do it to me. So that, as you mentioned at the beginning, that mysterious union between the supernatural and natural worlds, how they're intertwined, the people in the nameless people in Matthew 25, Lord, when did we see you hungry and thirsty and naked and blah, 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 blah. They're as incredulous then as we can be today. Like, oh, gee, I didn't see Jesus in that person. But then Jesus is telling us straight up he's there.
Right.
So that's the motive there, because we're doing it for him. So all these good things are good. It's good to give to charity and all that sort of stuff. The reason why we do it is because God wants us to. That's how we show love. John's letter of John, no one could say he loves God by saying he hates his neighbor. The one way we show we love our neighbor and show we love God is by giving to the poor and needy.
Yeah. David, always a tremendous joy and a blessing. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Marcus.
My guest has been David Bonagura. He is no stranger to this program. He is adjunct professor of classical languages at St. Joseph Seminary and adjunct professor of theology at Catholic Distance University. And we were talking about the two forms of Christian service. I'm Marcus Peter.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
The following program is brought to you in part by MyCatholicWill.com. Surveys show that more than half of Americans do not have a will. At MyCatholicWill.com, it takes as little as 15 minutes to write your will and secure a legacy of faith. MyCatholicWill.com is the exclusive online destination for creating a Catholic will. The process of writing a will is simple and now more accessible than ever. MyCatholicWill.com, a legacy of faith for those you love.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popcha.
Imagine you signed up for flying lessons, but 5 minutes into your first lesson, your instructor handed you the plane's controls and told you to try landing. It sounds crazy, but that's what we do when we ask our kids to complete a task they're not equipped for. Whether it's managing their frustration respectfully or cleaning up the messy room, if they don't have the skills they need to succeed, we're setting them up to crash. Before asking our kids to fly solo, we parents need to do some basic pre-flight checks. Are our kids old enough for the task we're giving them? Have they consistently shown mastery of that task? If not, we need to mentor them from the co-pilot seat just a little bit longer. Dive more deeply into discipleship discipline techniques by checking out the newest editions of Parenting Your Kids with Grace, or Parenting Your Teens and Tweens with Grace, or visiting CatholicCounselors.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
Christ is the answer, with Father John Riccardo.
We just did our parish mission a couple weeks ago now, and I suggested that in the course of the mission that we do something like a little mini spiritual assessment of our lives. I don't have to show this to anybody, but a great chance for us just with real honesty, just between us and Jesus, ask ourselves some questions. First question, given the fact that half of Catholics don't think God is even personal, would be to ask ourselves that. Do I think God is personal? And then to ask myself, do I think a relationship with Jesus is possible? Do I have a relationship with Jesus? And if so, what's it look like? And then perhaps a little bit more awkwardly or painfully, to ask Jesus from his perspective, what's the friendship that we have with him look like? How would he describe our friendship with him? That might be a hard conversation to have.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Derek Rotty. Amid the pervasive cultural upheaval and moral uncertainty of the mid-20th century, Archbishop Fulton Sheen emerged as a prophet of incisive hope. He gave people a reason to believe that life is worth living. And for decades, America's bishop wrote, taught, and preached about the major questions and issues that were shaping American culture. Joining me to talk about his latest book on Archbishop Fulton Sheen is Derek Rotty, the author of the book. Derek is a husband, father, and Catholic convert, and author of A Life of Conversion, Meeting Christ in the Gospels, and Prophet of Hope, Fulton Sheen Response to the Modern World. Thank you for joining us, Derek. How are you?
I'm well. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I thank you for being here. Fulton Sheen had a tremendous impact in my study into the Catholic faith, so I have a vested interest in this conversation. And I want to begin with this language of hope. For as brilliant an individual as he was, and his philosophical insight and acumen was, it was unparalleled, yet at the same time he was truly concerned about the evangelistic work of preaching hope to a culture that was slowly losing the Christian grip. Could you please speak to that?
Wow! How much time do we have? Right? that was his. That was his thing from the time, from what I can tell in my research, in putting, doing the research for this book, from the time he took up the chair of as the host of the Catholic Hour radio show in 1931, that's what he wanted to do was share this message that life is worth living, despite the things we're experiencing, we're going through on a daily basis. I mean, 1931 is right in the pit, if you will, of the Great Depression, right? The worst of it was just becoming realized in America, and he's walking these Lenten reflections on a weekly basis that lead up to the resurrection of our Lord, and that's his message, that despite the ugliness of the cross, particularly, in the case he was preaching, it leads to the glory of Easter, and in our lives in every way, the ugliness that we experience, the despair that might confront us, can be combated by the fact that we have a purpose, that life is worth living, that Jesus Christ has overcome death, has overcome the grave, and has left us a church to bring us into communion and life-giving relationship with the Heavenly Father. That was his refrain. That was the thing he just kept saying over and over and over in, of course, many different ways, but every one of the sources that I looked at came back to that constant refrain.
Right. And that refrain is crucial because in your book you pit him against the contradicting thinkers of his time, people who stood in contradiction to what he was saying. And the first of which is John Dewey. For the listeners who don't know who he is, talk about his pragmatism and the overt hyper-rationality with which he reshaped the educational paradigm of America.
Yeah, so funny, I guess a funny little story as I'm going through doing the research here, I'd tell people, Fulton Sheen was in conversation with these various thinkers, and I'd start listing them, and I say, John Dewey, and everybody knows the effect of John Dewey if they don't know John Dewey's name, and so many people would say, oh yeah, John Dewey, the Dewey Decimal System, right? Yeah, I studied that in school. No, that's a different Dewey. So, but yeah, you're right on there that John Dewey's thought. John Dewey is known as the sort of best purveyor, or the most influential purveyor of this uniquely American philosophy called pragmatism. It was it was developed by William James and Charles Sanders Peirce before him, but he studied under these two men at Johns Hopkins, and really took the next steps in making it applicable in ways that would transform culture. And like you mentioned, it was most specifically through the education system. That everybody who's gone to school in the United States, virtually, whether it's public school or whether it's private school, or even to a large extent Catholic schools, have been infiltrated by this pragmatic philosophy and the system that Dewey intended to set up. And it has been transformative for culture, where, one of the questions people ask about education, for example, is, well, how's that practical? What are you going to do with that degree, right? That's a direct effect of pragmatism.
Yep. And therein lies the issue, because that's such a departure from... We can talk about Catholic education, which Fulton Sheen had a tremendous worldview for, but even from a natural law perspective, it's just such a deviation from how the human person ought to be formed.
Right.
So from there, let's jump ahead then. So Fulton Sheen then had dialogues with H.L. Mencken. Many people don't know who he is, but gosh, his skepticism was nothing short of biting, especially towards things like religion and morality and an objective standard of truth.
Right. Yeah. And again, as I was doing the research and I was learning, more about each of these figures, these interlocutors, we might call them. I would look for, or I would find little bits of myself in each of them, and I must say I found more of H.L. Mencken in myself than I found probably any of them. Just the cynicism and the skepticism. And left to its own devices. I mean, Mencken was clearly a smart guy, but he had a really bad experience with religion when he was young, and just kind of wrote off the whole thing. And that was his natural cynical and skeptical mindset, or his approach to life, just really did take it made him sour on life and other people and, government systems. And when you read through it, you feel that coming through. It drips off of every page, and you just think, oh, if he knew the hope that Sheen and others certainly can convey, how great of a wit and an intellect he might have been for the sake of truth. But I remember particularly reading his treatise on religion, the treatise on the gods, I believe was the name of it, and it just he walked the path of every biblical critical method scholar who reduced the glory and grandeur of the scriptures to something that wasn't even fully knowable, or wasn't believable because of whatever ways that he wanted to pick it apart. And it was it was at least 500 pages, I believe, maybe almost 600 pages of this on every page. And yet you could, as you read through it, you could just feel like, oh, if he had been presented a really, really solid argument, he might have changed the way you look at this. Of course, we know that probably wasn't true. That arguments don't ever really win hearts. But I was particularly drawn to one passage in his work, and I don't even remember if it made it into the book finally. But he wrote toward the end of his life that he had never known a Christian worth knowing. And I just thought, oh, if he could have encountered a genuine bishop, a genuine pastor, someone like Sheen, how differently that might have turned out.
We are talking with Derek Rotty. He did a tremendous amount of research into the interlocutors that Archbishop Fulton Sheen in his evangelistic work engaged with. And these were thinkers, commentators, and contributors at the time, contemporaries of his, that were trying to shape culture in the antithetical vision of what Fulton Sheen was hoping for, which is still the Christian biblical worldview. We're continuing on the other side of the break. This is all compiled in Derek's new book, Prophet of Hope. Fulton Sheen responds to the modern world. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at avemaria.com. That's avemaria.com.
Hello, Steve Ray here from Footprints of God Pilgrimages. The land of our Lord and Our Lady is calling us. We're heading back to the Holy Land over Christmas break this year. We have the best, most reliable guides and services awaiting us. The holy sites are open, and the local Christians are anxious to see us. Galilee, Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem. No crowds, no lines. Hope you can join us.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net.
Strained or broken relationships are a given in most of our lives. Friends fall away, siblings drift apart, children sever ties with their parents, and despite our best efforts, these painful fissures are difficult to mend. Hi, I'm Dr. Ray. If you want to learn how to communicate better with the difficult people in your life and be a more easygoing, more forgiving person, check out my book, How to Get Along with Almost Everybody. Check it out. And all my other books on the store page at avemariaradio.net. That's avemariaradio.net.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Teaches that Jesus Christ is literally and wholly present, body and blood, soul and divinity, under the appearances of bread and wine. In the Bread of Life discourse documented in John chapter 6, Jesus states that he is the bread of life, and that his flesh is true food and his blood true drink. The Jews were scandalized in verse 52. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? Jesus does not back down, but reiterates this teaching 4 more times over the next 4 verses. Many left in verse 66 because this teaching was truly difficult. But at no point does Jesus water down his teaching and call them back. No, he allows them to leave, and even questions his 12 apostles if they too wish to leave. Jesus intended to be understood literally, and the Jews, apostles, and the Catholic Church absolutely take him at his word. Examining the truths of the Catholic faith, this is faithforensics.org.
How does one describe Christ's relationship to his church? The Catholic Catechism says Christ is one with his church. He is the head, we are the members. Head and members together make up the whole body of Christ. Head and members form, as it were, one and the same mystical person. St. Joan of Arc put it very simply to her judges. She said, "About Jesus Christ and the Church, I simply know they're just one thing. We shouldn't complicate the matter." The Catechism also refers to the imagery of the bridegroom, the theme of Christ as the bridegroom of the Church, as two in one relationship. Just as in marriage, two become one flesh, the Church is portrayed as the spotless bride of the spotless Lamb. Christ has joined the Church with himself in an everlasting covenant. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Derek Rotty, author of most recently Prophet of Hope, Fulton Sheen Response to the Modern World, published by OSV Press. I want to continue this conversation to try to cover as much as possible, Derek. So we move on then to the next thinker. How did you find the correspondences of Fulton Sheen with Henry Luce?
Well, Luce was no worries. Luce is one of those figures who wanted to be one of the great men of history, but ended up being much more behind the scenes than we realize, or his influence came from behind the scenes. He was the founder of Time magazine, which came out weekly for 60 years, I believe, something like that, and gave Americans their news, right, mm-hmm. and their view on the news for many years. He was also the founder of Life magazine, which mm-hmm. Many of the most iconic pictures of American life that we can think of were published in Life magazine, and then his pet project, or the project he was most enthusiastic about, was Fortune magazine. So if we hear about the Fortune 500 companies, right? The 500 most valuable companies on the stock market, or however they put that. Mm-hmm. That was the project that Luce saw as his way to make culture and transform culture and bring America's economic potential to its highest possible point. Luce made the economy and economic prowess, I think, into a god. I think that's that's what I really, that's the conclusion I came to as I did that research. Luce, though, maybe more than almost any of the thinkers I deal with in the book, had a very specific interest in the Catholic Church and in Fulton Sheen himself, because so I'll preface this by saying most of Time magazine's articles ran about 500 words at most, and then in 1952 he did a 5,000 word profile on Bishop Fulton Sheen, this mm-hmm. bishop who was now in New York, who had this new TV show, Life is Worth Living, but it came on the heels of the fact that Luce's wife, her name was Claire Booth Luce, she was a congresswoman from Connecticut, had been brought into the Catholic Church by Fulton Sheen when he was still in Washington, D.C., so he has this relationship, or they don't have a relationship, but he knows of Bishop Sheen because of what Bishop Sheen has, how he, or Monsignor Sheen at the time, had brought his wife into the church. So he had to kind of wrestle with these questions. Oh, my wife has become Catholic. What do I think about this? And what do I think about this man Sheen, who clearly formed her and transformed the way she looked at the world and thought about life? It's just a really interesting dynamic that showed up there with Luce. The thing that comes back, though, is that Sheen saw the transformation of American culture into this worship of the economy, right? This worship of finance and mammon.
Yeah.
And he tried what he could do to call America back to a faith in Jesus Christ and a trust in the church.
Yep.
that would mitigate that worship of mammon. That was one of the most fascinating chapters to dig into and to write.
And in fact, if I may go so far as to point out, in that chapter, you make very clear that Lewis made himself a bit of a servant of the industry, the media. But Sheen did it in reverse. He mastered the media and utilized it as a servant of the gospel.
That's an interesting dynamic, right? That there was in Loose, right, from the very beginning of Time magazine, they were very quickly doing the Man of the Year stories, right? So you may remember this. Time would do these Man of the Year stories, and they'd choose the best man of America, the most prominent man of America, or around the world for that matter. And it seems to me Luce always kind of wanted to be that man or be recognized as that man. And again, just stayed behind the scenes. But, Sheen, on the other hand, really, while he may have been celebrated as kind of an iconic figure, certainly a well-known cultural figure, he wanted to turn the attention to the greatest man, Jesus Christ, right? Which is why he started in 1934 and wrote The Eternal Galilean, right, which was about Jesus, but then by 1958, he made his whole work about this 600-page tome, this magnus opus that he wrote called Life of Christ. That's what he wanted to show. He wanted to show Jesus as the great man.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it really comes out in his interactions, which, if you don't mind, I want to jump ahead here. I know you talk about Margaret Mead, and that was a brilliant chapter, especially the way Sheen takes on the problems of relativism and Mead's own worldview. But B.F. Skinner, whom we take for granted, has a tremendous influence in the way we think about the human person today.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, each of these chapters was really fascinating in its own way, but B.F. Skinner's, I remember the editor, giving the comments to me, and she said, "This is just a fascinating and maddening chapter because B.F. Skinner, reduces the human being to mere material and says we can get anything out of the human person that we want, as long as we know what to input into the human person. The way we condition the human person will give us exactly what we want." And of course, that's antithetical to what Catholics and Christians believe about the human person. The human person is not something to just be manipulated. The human person is something to be fostered and loved and seen for its value, made in the image and likeness of God. And that contrast, again, was just, it couldn't have been clearer from the earliest part of, B.F. Skinner's career. Again, he was raised in a sort of nominal Calvinist Protestant culture, and his family was pretty much unbelievers, which conditions a lot of the way any of us experience the world. If we're put in fruitful contact with the life of the mind and the life of faith, great things can happen, as we see with Sheen. But with Skinner, it took a different direction, and he wanted to be kind of like Luce wanted to be a great man. Skinner, I think, wanted to be the one who created the great man, and I mean created in the sense of they will be like gods, right, all the way back to Genesis. I was just enthralled with a novel that he wrote in 1947 called Walden 2. So he plays on Henry David Thoreau's story of being a recluse at Walden Manor in Massachusetts. And so Skinner uses that sort of historical connection to say, oh, we can build a utopia. We can build the world we want at this place called Walden, the second version of Walden, by conditioning people in the way we see fit and making the world what we want to make it, make the world in our own image. And the great irony is that when you read that book, it ends up that the conditioning happens through religious activity. It happens through worship. It happens through prayer. It happens through intellectual development. And so what he really couldn't get away from is the fact that, the thing that the Christian faith, the Catholic Church, has been doing for centuries, is the only way to do it. It's the only way that human beings get formed. Right. Because no matter if you try to secularize it, you're going to be using those same tenets, those same signposts of how you form the human person.
Yep. And that's precisely why B.F. Skinner's mechanistic view of the human person just stands in complete juxtaposition to Fulton Sheen, who, sure, you can talk about biblical, but also just the classical way of viewing the human person and being bearers of the divine image. Now, we're running out of time in this segment. There's so many other conversations. The chapter on Betty Friedan was compelling to me. Michael Harrington was the other. But just to end, we've got about a minute left. Can you please encourage our listeners to pick up Sheen's works in its various forms as an antidote to the hopelessness of modernity?
Absolutely. Thank you for the time. So what my book does is synthesizes a lot of thought in conversation with American culture, but Sheen's works are just fantastic in themselves. I mentioned, some of the books are readily available. Life of Christ is still being republished to this day. There are a number of others that can be found if you go search, on Amazon for Fulton Sheen books. I want to see... I would hope to see at some point that maybe we find a way to broadcast the radio series that he did from 1930 almost through 1950. And even if we just got the texts of those, they're so rich and so brilliant, and they make a nice little reflection for a day or something like that. You can actually go and find it on a podcast, the Life is Worth Living podcast, and there's so many places to find it.
Well, thank you so much, Derek. This was a joy. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
My guest has been Derek Rotty. He is the author of Prophet of Hope, Fulton Sheen Responds to the Modern World. And this is an interesting book. It puts Fulton Sheen in conversation with a lot of the contemporary thinkers of his time and shows how the biblical worldview is superior. I'm Marcus Peter.